Hello and welcome back to the Fantasy Playmakers. What's up, guys? In today's video, I'm going to be doing another mock draft using the Fantasy Pros Draft Wizard. And for this mock, it's going to be a 12-team league, PPR scoring. We're going to be drafting from the 8th overall pick, and then just a pretty standard roster setup. 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, 1 tight end, a flex, and then 6 bench slots. I'm just not going to be drafting kicker or defense for this mock. So let's get right into the draft. So this is how the start of the first round went. We saw Christian McCaffrey go at the 101, Dalvin Cook at the 102. I think those spots are basically locked up. You see this in probably 95% of drafts. And then Derrick Henry and Alvin Kamara, those guys are very common to be picked either at the 103 or the 104. They're pretty interchangeable at that slot. In terms of PPR scoring, I'd be going with Kamara, but you really can't go wrong with Derrick Henry's safety. And then Zeke has kind of been the consensus guy here at the 105. I personally would prefer another player who I think I'm going to go with at this 108 pick. But then we saw Devontae Adams go at 106, then Jonathan Taylor at the 107. So let's take a look at who is available for us, and I'll talk through the player that I like as my 5th overall guy. So in this range, I'm still looking to go running backs. I think there are still some very solid workhorse running backs available. And the guy that I'm going to be looking at here is Aaron Jones from the Green Bay Packers. In his last 2 seasons, while operating as the full-time starter, he has finished as the RB4 in points per game and the RB5. He's just been incredibly consistent when you look at his yearly production. This is going to be a high-scoring offense. He's going to have a lot of opportunities to get into the end zone, and he's just a great all-around running back. He's going to get some volume in the rushing game. He also has great receiving upside, especially with Jamal Williams gone and A.J. Dillon now being the backup. I think he's going to be the clear top receiving back in that offense. And so I just really like his consistency. I also think he has a lot of upside. And to me, he seems to just be a very safe pick this year. So I feel great having him as my RB1. After we picked Aaron Jones, we saw Travis Kelce go at the 109, and then Saquon at the 110, Tyreek Hill at the 111, and Austin Eckler at the 112. I think that's pretty typical to what you guys are going to see in your drafts. Then we saw Calvin Ridley go at the 201, Nick Chubb at the 202, and then back-to-back wide receivers with Stephon Diggs and A.J. Brown. All of that stuff makes sense. I would not be drafting A.J. Brown this early. I actually have him behind Hopkins, I have him behind Jefferson, and I have him behind Keenan Allen. Obviously, I still think he's a great wide receiver 1, but I do think his ceiling is a little bit capped this year now that you have Julio Jones coming in, and there's just not going to be a ton of pass attempts on that Titans offense. Plus, we're hearing that he's having issues with his knee, which is not ideal because he did have surgery on both his knees this offseason. And that was kind of a positive for me. I was like, wow, he put up those numbers while dealing with those knee issues, but it seems like the issues are continuing into 2021. So those are just a few of the reasons why I wouldn't be taking him that high. But now we have our 2nd round pick here, and we could look for our wide receiver 1, or we could be going with our 2nd workhorse running back. In most of these drafts, I really like going running backs early and often, especially in bigger leagues. You know, a 12-team league, I really like to just get those top 2 or 3 running backs right away, just because the position is going to thin out so quickly, and I think I'm going to continue using that strategy in this draft. I think there are going to be some solid options available at wide receiver in the 3rd and 4th rounds, so I'd much rather just go out, get that RB2 right here. And the question is it going to be Antonio Gibson or is it going to be Joe Mixon? This is kind of a spot where I've had to choose between these players in a bunch of different mocks, and I've gone with Joe Mixon in the past. I just think he has a higher ceiling this year because he's going to have such a big workload and he's going to have that receiving role. Antonio Gibson just does not have that receiving role yet in this Washington football team offense. But I also think it's very important to just diversify your portfolio. And since I do like both of these players, since I've gone with Mixon and a few of these other mocks, I'm going to go with Antonio Gibson because I do like both of them. They're back-to-back in my rankings, and I really don't think you could go wrong with either player. They both have a ton of very strong arguments in support of them for the 2021 season. To end the 2nd round, we saw Hopkins and Metcalf go at the 207 and 208. Patrick Mahomes coming off the board at the 209. Way too early for Mahomes. Justin Jefferson at the 210. Then Mixon and Clyde Edwards-Helaire going back-to-back to finish out the 2nd round. Then to start off the third, we saw the 2 tight ends come off the board, Waller and Kittle. Then we saw McLaurin, Keenan Allen, and A-Rob come off for the wide receivers, and then Dobbins and Montgomery at the running back position. So now we have our 3rd round pick. We've already gone with back-to-back workhorse running backs. The question is, do we go out and get a 3rd, or are we looking at that wide receiver position? Since those top 3 tight ends are off the board, the tight end position, we're just not going to be looking there for this pick. Quarterbacks, I think it's too early, way too early actually, in the 3rd round to be going there. So let's look at who we have on the board at wide receiver. I think all these guys are just super solid options. The wide receiver position is pretty interesting because when you look at like the season-long finishes, basically the guys from like wide receiver like 14 to like wide receiver 24 are all just going to be so close together in points per game. So I feel pretty solid about all of these guys. Robert Woods, Amari Cooper, Mike Evans, Cooper Kupp. I'm way lower on CeeDee Lamb than consensus, but he would also not be a terrible pick here. I'd much prefer to get him in the 4th or 5th round, but I just don't think he's going to be falling there. At running back, we have Deandre Swift and Chris Carson. These are probably 2 of my clear top options, but I'm getting a little bit lower on Deandre Swift. He's been dealing with his injury. We're not even sure if he's going to be ready to go week 1, and I'm just not trying to go out and buy guys who are already injured going to the season, and there is just a little bit of skepticism about how he's going to be used in this offense. So I think Chris Carson would be the top running back here, and when I'm looking at the draft board, there's going to be 8 picks between my selection here at the 308 and the 405. When I'm looking at these teams, we have the 9th pick, does not have a running back, and then the 10, 11, and 12 picks all have 1 running back. So it's very likely that they go out and snag an RB in their next 2 picks. And so I think I'm going to go out, I'm going to lock in Chris Carson as my RB3 because I do feel confident with the depth at the wide receiver position. And I still think there's going to be a guy that I like there in the 4th round. So Chris Carson is going to be the pick to slot into my flex. So at the end of the 3rd and start of the 4th round, we saw 1 running back come off, and that was Deandre Swift. And then we also saw Josh Allen go in the 3rd round. The rest of the picks were wide receivers. So Mike Evans, Robert Woods, Deontay Johnson, CeeDee Lamb, Julio Jones, and Amari Cooper. So we have our 4th round pick, and a lot of wide receivers came off the board. Hopefully there are still some options that we're interested in, and luckily there are. I'm still not going to look at the quarterback or tight end position yet, just too early, and since I have 3 running backs, this pick is just locked in at the wide receiver position. And when I'm looking at these guys, we've got Chris Godwin, Cooper Kupp, DJ Moore. I would even throw T. Higgins kind of into that group, but out of all of these guys, I like Cooper Kupp the most. He's going to be a top wide receiver on a very solid offense. Him and Robert Woods, I really think you could rank them either way. They're a 1A and 1B type of situation. You have Matthew Stafford coming in. I'm a big fan of this Rams offense as a whole, and I really think he's going to feast. The only thing that held him back last year was his touchdowns. He almost went for 1,000 yards, 92 receptions. The issue is he only caught 3 total touchdowns, but with Stafford coming in, I don't think this is going to be an issue, and we know he has a very high ceiling, was the 4th overall wide receiver in 2019, so I think he's much closer to that 4th overall finish than his 26th overall finish last year. Wow, so wide receivers have just totally taken over the draft board here in the 4th and 5th rounds. We saw 2 running backs go in the 4th, 1 tight end, which was Kyle Pitts in the 5th. The rest of the picks have been all at the wide receiver position. So that's going to be very interesting to see where we go with this pick because ideally we probably would snag a wide receiver. But when I'm looking at the value here, Juju, Robbie Anderson, Boyd, some of those players are solid options, but not 5th round players in my opinion. We could go James Robinson or Mike Davis at running back. I wouldn't hate those picks, but I don't like it here because we already do have 3 running backs. So this is actually a spot where I may look to go after a quarterback, and my top guy available would be Kyler Murray. I really don't think you can go wrong with Kyler Murray or Lamar Jackson. At the tight end position, I'm just not going to be looking at these guys until the 6th round. I think that's much more appropriate for their draft slot. But people forget that Kyler Murray in 2020, before his shoulder injury, and I think it was week 11, was on pace to be the best quarterback ever in fantasy football on a points per game basis, ahead of Lamar Jackson, ahead of Mahomes. The man was just absolutely going off. And so if he can put together an injury-free 2021 season, I could easily see him being a major league winner for a lot of teams this year. After we picked Kyler Murray, we saw James Robinson go off at the 509, Michael Thomas at the 510. Guys, please do not draft Michael Thomas this early. I know he has the injury and you're thinking, oh, maybe he comes back, returns a lot of value. I think he's going to miss a very significant chunk of the season, and he's just not worth taking this early. It's just going to be a huge hit to your team, if he suffers another setback, and so I'm just not going to be interested in him this early. The last two picks of the 5th round, we saw Mark Andrews and TJ Hawkinson go off the board, and then in the 6th round, it was Mike Davis, Chase Edmonds, Noah Fant, and Lamar Jackson, which leads us into our pick here at the 605. Right now, we have one quarterback, 3 running backs, and 1 wide receiver. And since those second tier of tight ends came off the board, I'm just not going to be looking at the tight end position for at least like 3 or 4 rounds. And so I'm pretty locked in here to wide receiver. If I was just going best player available, it would be Darrell Henderson from the Rams. Even though they have Sony Michel coming in, I still think he has the opportunity to be the workhorse there. I mean, Sony Michel was buried in that Patriots committee, and so I don't really think he's some top-tier player that's going to overtake Darrell Henderson. Obviously, he's going to limit his ceiling, but I don't even know if I can go with Darrell Henderson here because I already have 3 running backs, and I really don't think I can because then my wide receiver position would just be atrocious. So I do think we just have to lock in here at wide receiver. We're looking at basically the same guys that we could have looked at in the 5th round. So Juju, Robbie Anderson, Tyler Boyd, Cortland Sutton. Out of all of those guys, I think Robbie Anderson is the one sticking out to me. I think he's a very safe option to pick here as my wide receiver too. He may not have the ceiling of some of these other guys, but I mean, he's going to be a solid volume option on this Panthers offense. They obviously really like him because they just extended him. We saw last season 136 targets, 95 receptions, basically totally shifted the way he scored his points. On the Jets, he was kind of seen as a big play guy, whereas with the Panthers, he was much more of a volume receiver. That's obviously very favorable for PPR scoring. And then also, Curtis Samuel is no longer there, so I think him and DJ Moore are going to be the clear top 2 in this offense. You do have Terrace Marshall, who I like as a player, but I mean, there's no guarantee he comes in and has a huge role right away. But in this spot I'm in, where I'm very behind at the wide receiver position, I feel very comfortable having Robbie Anderson to be my wide receiver too. Wow, so this is actually a little bit unfortunate. Right after we went with Robbie Anderson, it was 3 straight tight ends off the board: Logan Thomas, Dallas Goedert, and Robert Tonyan. I think this is a reach for all 3 of those players. I like Robert Tonyan as a late round guy, but it seems like people panicked. They started seeing tight ends fly off the board, and they just wanted to get their guy. This is something I talked about in, I believe it was yesterday's video, with must avoid draft day mistakes. And my rule number 1 was do not fall for these runs at certain positions because you're just losing out on value at other spots. So I'm not going to go here and panic and pick a tight end because I know that I'm going to go out and be able to get a late round option at just much better value. And if every other team has a tight end, they're probably not going to be interested in going out and getting their second guy. So it looks like we're going to continue to punt that position. And let's look at who's on the board here in the 7th round. Right now we have 3 running backs, 2 wide receivers, 1 quarterback, no tight ends. So I think we could really go running back or wide receiver, probably the emphasis on the wide receiver position just because it is much thinner and we also have less players at that spot. So at wide receiver, Brandon Cooks would probably be my top guy here. Brandon Cooks or Antonio Brown, to be honest with you. But I'd probably lean Brandon Cooks because I think AB could fall to us in the next round. At running back, I do actually like Damian Harris. They traded Sony Michel. Ramondre Stevenson has been making some noise in training camp, but I do think that Damian Harris is still going to be the workhorse. The issue is that if Cam is there, I mean, his ceiling is just going to be majorly capped. So I think I'm going to pass on him here, snag my guy Brandon Cooks, and then we'll kind of see what happens with our next pick. If AB goes off the board, maybe we go with Harris. If Harris is off the board, then we're probably looking at AB. Hopefully both those guys don't get snagged. All right, so we actually saw a decent amount of running backs come off the board here to end the 7th round and start off the 8th. So Melvin Gordon and Leonard Fournette in the 7th. Will Fuller and Russell Wilson to conclude that round, and then 4 straight running backs to start off the 8th round. Damian Harris, Kenyon Drake, Ronald Jones, and Nyheim Hines. so I did not see Antonio Brown come off the board, and I think that is where we're going to go with this pick. I don't really love these running backs that are still on the board, and I do just have 3 solid locked-in workhorse running backs, so I'm fine kind of waiting until maybe another round or two to get my RB4. I'm just going to shore up this wide receiver position. We may have some more depth, but our ceiling is definitely capped, so I'm going to go with AB, just a significantly cheaper price than the other 2 wide receivers on this team with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, but he actually out-targeted and out-receptioned both of them when he was on the team, and that was just, him coming in off the street. So I really like Antonio Brown this year. I think he's going to have a major role in this offense, and is going to be a very solid fantasy asset, especially in PPR scoring. To finish out the 8th round, we did see more running backs come off the board. A lot of people getting depth at that position. Sermon, Carter, Moss, David Johnson, A.J. Dillon all went in that round. Then the 9th round flipped more to wide receivers. One thing that's important to point out is that I do not have a tight end, and then the guy with the 2nd overall pick also does not have a tight end. We are the only 2 teams that do not. So I still feel comfortable kind of waiting. There are going to be some late round options that I'm looking at here. You can see Tyler Higbee, Mike Gesicki, Irv Smith Jr. All of these guys, warrant potential picks. And so I'd probably favor Higbee, but, not an extreme amount over these other players. And since we have Kyler Murray locked in as our QB1, we're probably just looking at running back and wide receiver again. I probably want to go out and get a running back. And luckily, the guy here who's ranked first for Fantasy Pros of the available players at the position, Jamal Williams, is still available. And I do like Jamal Williams at this slot. He's probably not going to be the workhorse for the Lions. There's probably no way he's the workhorse for the Lions. But with this Deandre Swift injury, I think it definitely is going to open up some room for him. I think they were already kind of operating with some sort of committee. Jamal Williams is a great pass catcher. This is PPR scoring. So just a nice kind of depth piece to have. And I do think in certain matchups, he could have standalone value in a starting lineup if we really needed it. Obviously, we don't necessarily want it to come to that, but I do think he has that potential. So he's a very solid depth option here to be my RB4. Right after Jamal Williams, we saw J.D. McKissic come off the board. A little bit unfortunate because I was thinking about drafting him as a handcuff to Antonio Gibson because A.J. Dillon is already off the board. But whatever, there's going to be other options available. And then Tom Brady, Phillip Lindsay, and Gus Edwards to round out the 9th round. And then the 10th round, it was Curtis Samuel, Michael Gallup, Marquise Brown, and Devin Singletary, which leads us into our 10th round pick here. Still need a tight end. Not really in a hurry to grab one. Maybe we snag Higbee, but I honestly am fine waiting because I do think there's still going to be value at other positions. Right now we have 4 running backs, 4 wide receivers, so we could really just chase the value at this slot. When I'm looking at the running back position, none of these guys are really jumping out to me as great options. I don't really want to go out and draft some other running backs handcuff. Why am I going out and getting Tony Pollard? I feel like I'm just going to drop him from my top waiver wire pickup in week 1. I do want to look at the wide receivers to see if my guy Marquez Calloway is available. He's way down these rankings. Yes, he is. I think this is a decent spot to draft him. I think his ADP is definitely going to be on the rise in more competitive leagues. But in your family leagues, your less competitive leagues with friends, you're going to be able to absolutely steal this guy, Marquez Calloway. And the thing is, he has 2 things going for him. The first is that the opportunity is just 100% there with Mike Thomas out. Traquan Smith has been injured in training camp. He has been getting all the buzz as the wide receiver 1, so he's going to be able to step into that role likely in week 1. And then the other thing is we've literally seen him go out and absolutely ball out, put up some really solid numbers in the first preseason week, and then absolutely went crazy in week 2 of preseason, caught 5 passes for 100+ yards, 2 touchdown catches that were both just amazing plays. So you also see that the talent is there. And so if I'm able to get the wide receiver 1 for the Saints as my wide receiver 5, I'm going to buy into that value all day long. So in the 10th round, we finally saw that other team that didn't have a tight end. They went out and they drafted Irv Smith. So now we are the only other team that doesn't have a tight end. But honestly, we're at the very end of the draft, so I could easily see a team going out and drafting a backup. So with this pick, unless we see some absurd value at another position, I do think it may just be better to go out and secure Tyler Higbee. He was the best guy at the tight end position for probably 3 rounds. So to get him this late, I think we're already getting him at a very nice value, and he's going to end up rounding out our starting lineup. I talked about with Cooper Kupp how I like this Rams offense. Tyler Higbee is going to be the tight end one. You don't have Gerald Everett there anymore. And so he really does have the opportunity to ball out this year. And so we're going to draft him as our starting tight end. To round out the 11th round and start off the 12th, there were picks at every position. Marvin Jones at wide receiver. We had some of these deep running back options. Jonnu Smith at tight end. Hurts and Lawrence at quarterback. So we have our 12th round selection. We really only have 2 picks left. It's going to be our final 2 bench slots. Right now we have 5 wide receivers. We have 4 running backs. So we probably want to snag at least 1 more running back before this draft is over. But I mean, when I'm looking at the guys here, it is definitely slim pickings. Rashad Penny, Darrell Williams, Damian Williams, Salvin Ahmed. I mean, if we're looking at the handcuffs for my guys, Aaron Jones, A.J. Dillon is gone, Antonio Gibson, J.D. McKissick is gone. But for Chris Carson, Rashad Penny is still on the board. So he's the only guy that really could have any sort of like upside for us, because I'm not trying to draft someone else's handcuff. I already talked about that. So Rashad Penny here. If Chris Carson does go down, maybe we slot Rashad Penny in there. Just a little bit of insurance on one of our top running backs. A ton of late round picks all over the place. A ton of backup QBs. Matt Ryan, Trey Lance, Deshaun Watson, Justin Fields, Baker Mayfield, some running backs, wide receivers, second tight ends, Jared Cook and Hunter Henry. We have our last pick here, and the question is, do we look for a wide receiver? I really like Russell Gage or Cole Beasley who are available, or do I go out and draft Zach Ertz at the tight end position if he is still there? That's something I really like to do. Go out, draft Zach Ertz, just because you're not going to find any of these players going in this range who, are 1 year removed from an amazing season, going as the 23rd overall tight end. Gronk, arguably the best tight end of all time, still available here, but it's just a totally different situation. He was retired, had a decent season last year, but there are just so many weapons here on the Buccaneers. With Ertz, there are not a lot of weapons here in Philadelphia. He is competing with Dallas Goedert, but he could be traded. We just don't know what's going to happen. So I just think this is such a low risk pick that I'm really willing to just pull the trigger here for my last roster spot. All right, so this is our final roster here. Don't pay attention to the grade. It just grades you on how well you follow their ADP. So let's just go through this team real quick. Kyler Murray at quarterback, Aaron Jones at running back, Antonio Gibson at running back, Cooper Kupp and Robbie Anderson at the wide receiver slots, Tyler Higbee at tight end, Chris Carson in the flex, and then our bench is Brandon Cooks, Antonio Brown, Jamal Williams, Marquez Calloway, Rashad Penny, and Zach Ertz. So super strong at the quarterback position, very strong with our top 3 running backs. Our wide receivers, not super top heavy, but we do have a lot of solid depth there. Tight end, definitely our weakest position, but I think Tyler Higbee definitely could finish as a mid-tier tight end 1, and Zach Ertz, definitely just a shot at some potential. So I think this is a very solid overall roster. If you guys stuck around till the end of the video, let me know what you guys think. How do you think this draft turned out? Would you have made any different picks? Let me know down below in the comment section. And then if you enjoyed the video, please just leave a like and subscribe to the channel. That really helps support me a lot. But that's going to be it for today. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you guys next time.